Welcome back to episode 2 of the Offseason, The Assistants, while we chronicle the Miami Dolphins 2020 offseason. And today we're going to discuss the changes in Coach Brian Flores' coaching staff. And he's continued a pattern of some unorthodox hiring here in the NFL. Coach Flores kind of shocked the NFL and the Miami Dolphins fan base by immediately releasing his offensive coordinator and his defensive coordinator right after the season. Some folks felt like, they did an adequate job considering the circumstances. And we don't know what's going on behind the scenes, but we can try to decipher some things and some of the comments that Flores has made. And it just seems like there wasn't enough teaching going on in the building. I chronicled in episode 2, the head man in charge, about the importance of teaching in football. So if you're interested in my thoughts, go back and watch episode 2. Today, we're going to discuss the changes beginning with the defensive side of the football. Defensive coordinator Patrick Graham left the Miami Dolphins to take the same job with the New York Giants, joining another former Patriots coach. To replace him, Brian Flores tapped his defensive backs coach and passing game coordinator Josh Boyer. Coach Boyer's been with Brian Flores for about 14 years, and maybe it was time for him to make that move and become a coordinator. I'm always a fan of promoting in-house. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at some of the assistants that he brought in and their unorthodox hiring. Miami kind of surprised the NFL world by hiring high school coach Kurt Kuntz. And excuse me if I'm pronouncing his name wrong. I don't know if it's Kuntz or if it's Kuntz. But they opened some eyes with this hiring. It says that he was hired to coach defensive backs. Well, we find out today that Brian Flores hired Cal defensive backs coach Gerald Alexander to coach defensive backs today. And there's some interesting thing about Cal's defensive backs. Did you know that Cal had probably the best secondary in college football? Interestingly enough, Sports Illustrated wrote an article about that secondary. And in that secondary, they had a walk-on track hurdler in Davis, a receiver turned safety in Hawkins, and not one, but 2 3-star rated high school cornerbacks to turn into the best secondary in football. And there's a story in there about a whiteboard that's in their room. I recommend you go over to Sports Illustrated and read that article because it kind of highlights some of the things that I've been saying about teaching in Miami. Also of note, Gerald Alexander also spent some time with the Miami Dolphins. So this is a young and upcoming football coach. Does the recent hiring of Illini defensive line coach Austin Clark also follow this pattern? And to be perfectly honest with you, I'm less concerned about the defense because that is head coach Brian Flores' specialty. So if any side of the football will have continuity, it's going to be on that side of the football. But from here, we're going to pivot to the offensive side of the football, where you are probably going to notice the most dramatic changes in not only personnel, but style of football that the Dolphins play. Which brings us to the new offensive coordinator, Chan Gailey. Chan Gailey replaces Chad O'Shea, who moved on to another job with the Cleveland Browns. And I wish Chad O'Shea and Coach Patrick Graham the best in their new jobs. But the NFL is a particular organization. And a lot can be said about how the league views a coach by what job he lands after he loses a job. Do you remember where Joe Philbin landed? How about Matt Burke? Do you remember where Matt Burke landed? Patrick Graham landed another defensive coordinator position. And Chad O'Shea went from being an offensive coordinator back to a wide receivers coach. And sometimes you get a job before you're ready for it. And I think that may have been the case with Coach Chad O'Shea. But he has landed in a nice spot with a very nice receiver room. And if he can make that work with Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham, then another position will be waiting on him at the end of his tenure in Cleveland. But that cycles us back to Chan Gailey. Coach Gailey has a lot of experience. He's been in a lot of roles in the NFL, from position coach to coordinator at several locations to head coach. And head coach in college football also. And if there's a style of football that's been played in the NFL, he's seen it. And I believe not only has he seen it, but he's coached several different styles of football in the NFL. A lot of people can only remember him from his time with the New York Jets. And we're going to dig into that just a little bit deeper and see if maybe we can explain what happened during his time with the New York Jets. But I'd like to cycle back to Pittsburgh. A lot of you folks are actually too young to remember this. But Chan Gailey was the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive coordinator in 1996, and he had a quarterback by the name of Mike Tomczak in Pittsburgh. And in 1996, they were the 15th ranked offense in the NFL. And that's usually by the gauge that they use, which is yardage. And that's not my favorite gauge. My favorite gauge is points per game. But when you hear analysts on television talk about offenses or defenses, they're referring to yardage. So they were 15th in yards with Mike Tomczak, but they were 11th in points per game. And then something happened. They had a young quarterback on that roster by the name of Kordell Stewart, who was nicknamed Slash. He was nicknamed Slash because of his ability to throw the football and run the football. And in 1997, they made him the starting quarterback and catapulted to 6th in yards and 7th in points. And I'm looking at the way Chan Gailey used Kordell Stewart, and that should give you an idea of what the Dolphins are expecting in any future quarterback they may be considering drafting in this NFL draft. Because if you look at the quarterbacks that are going to be available in this draft, a lot of them share some similar traits to one Kordell Stewart, and Chan Gailey was an early adopter of the spread offense. Because remember, we're talking 1997. And with the group of receivers that the Miami Dolphins have right now, I can see a lot of spread being run in Miami. But let's cycle back to the Jets, which is what most people remember from Chan Gailey. Chan Gailey was the Jets offensive coordinator from 2015 to 2017. And because of the Jets' overall record, people draw the conclusion that Chan Gailey failed in New York. And I think that requires a little bit of deep water, because we don't do shallow water here. We do deep water. Did you know in 2015 that the Ryan Fitzpatrick-led New York Jets were 15th in yards? Ryan was also 10th in touchdowns in the NFL that year. And then, as typical of Fitzmagic, the second year he falls off. They fell to 25th in yards. He was 28th in touchdowns, and he threw 12 touchdowns and 17 interceptions. But did anything happen between that 2015 and 2016 season when we look at the Jets roster? They lost 1,000-yard rusher Chris Ivory to the Saints and replaced him with 31-year-old Matt Forte, who promptly delivered 3.7 yards a carry. Now, I'm not going to disrespect Matt Forte because I think it can be explained in another element of the offense, which I've told you is the most important element of the offense, and that's the offensive line. That same year, they lost Pro Bowl left tackle DeBrickashaw Ferguson and replaced him with Ryan Clady from the Denver Broncos, who promptly only played 8 games. They lost Pro Bowl center Nick Mangold after only 8 games. And if you look at that roster, it was a hodgepodge of players playing in different positions. That offensive line was pretty much decimated that season. And if you don't have protection or the ability to create movement in the running game up front, it falls apart from there. Did anything else happen? How about wide receivers? Well, in 2015, they had Brandon Marshall and Eric Decker. They both were 1,000-yard receivers that season, but Eric Decker left. He did not return in 2016, and they replaced him with Quincy Enunwa. So I'm not saying that's the end-all, be-all of why they failed, but what I am saying is there are some reasonable explanations for why that offense would fall off in the way that it did. Coach Gailey has run spread. Coach Gailey has run power. And if there's a defense in the NFL, Coach Gailey has seen it. I believe having an experienced offensive coordinator around will also allow head coach Brian Flores to focus even more on the defensive side of the football, which is where he wants to be. And that's going to conclude the Assistants episode 2 of this podcast. And what we're going to do moving forward is now we're going to begin to dig in and dissect this roster position group by position group, starting with the single most important part of the football team, and that's the offensive line. Who deserves to stay? Who's gonna go? I'll see you on the other side.
With or without, it's nothing. With or without, it's
I went
nothing.
from drug dealer to heavy hitter to penny pincher. Ain't no cheap nigga, but I'm at home and use a visitor trying to deliver hot ones about to sizzle of me. I got that C4 blowing perpendicular. Since you didn't listen, I'm fixing to make you a listener. Wasting your ass like an old wet pack of cynicus. Vicious and ridiculous. Sinister ball, sinister the Wallace, but my name is Capri. Not Christopher, not even riddling. Can ever slow down the riddle of melanin in my skin. Makes the sunshine dimmer than 5%ers. Know the God flows the river. Push this more to the limit. I'm off into a killer front and center. I'm the sinner who manifests the figure. Make the skies clap after I rap.